A young nurse lost her job after giving CPR to a Navy SEAL in pawn shop. 24 hours later, her life was changed forever. It was getting dark when Mary, a 26-year-old nurse, clocked out of her shift and made her way to the pawn shop to retrieve her late father's watch. Little did she know of what was about to happen next, an event that would change her life forever. She never saw it coming. She stepped out of the hospital and walked toward the pawn shop that was just a block away. The evening air was crisp, with a gentle breeze brushing against her scrubs. A light drizzle misted the sidewalks, making the city shimmer faintly under the streetlights. Her shoes were soaked from a puddle she hadn't seen, but she didn't care. Her mind was fixed on the old wristwatch, a keepsake from her father, a man whose memory still held her heart tightly. She stepped into the shop quietly. The place was less busy than usual. Only 2 customers milled around in the corner, speaking in low tones. It was getting darker outside, and the usual crowd had thinned. Shelves of old electronics, antique coins, and dusty jewelry cases created a narrow path to the counter. The smell of aged wood and tarnished metal clung to the air. Mary spoke briefly with the elderly clerk and handed over the pawn receipt. He recognized her and disappeared into the back to fetch the item. She stood there, glancing around, her thoughts far away. He returned moments later and placed the wristwatch in her palm. Her fingers closed around it slowly, as though holding something sacred. A small smile crossed her face. She turned toward the door, ready to leave, when she heard a sharp scream. It came from behind her, followed by a heavy crash. She turned around instinctively. A man, tall, broad, dressed in camouflage, had fallen hard to the floor. He lay motionless on his back, eyes open but blank, his chest still. Gasps echoed from the 2 customers near the shelves. The clerk froze, then began shouting, "Don't touch him. Call 911. Don't get involved." But Mary didn't hear him. Her body moved before her brain could even process the moment. She dropped to her knees beside the man and checked for a pulse. Nothing. No breathing. His skin was already cooling. Her heart raced. Her training kicked in. She tilted his head back gently, opened his airway, and began chest compressions. She counted under her breath, her hands steady but urgent. 1, 2, 3, 4. The weight of his chest met her palms with resistance. Sweat started forming on her forehead as her body went to war against time. The clerk was still shouting, pacing behind her, terrified of what might happen inside his store. "You're gonna get sued if you touch him. You're not on duty," he yelled. Mary didn't stop. She blocked out the noise, the panic, the pressure. The world narrowed to the rhythm of compressions and the man's still chest. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths. Again. Her arms ached, but she pushed through. The 2 customers watched, stunned, one of them fumbling to call 911. The seconds dragged, feeling like an eternity. Mary's mind was focused on the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could bring him back. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know why he collapsed. She didn't even know if he would survive. But she knew she had to keep going. And then, he gasped. The man's chest lifted slightly. A weak sound escaped his lips. His body flinched. Mary stopped just for a second and leaned in, checking again. Yes, a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. Sirens wailed in the distance. The sound grew louder, closer, until red and blue lights flashed through the front windows. Paramedics rushed in, took over, and lifted the man onto a stretcher. One of them glanced at Mary and paused. "You a nurse?" he asked. She nodded, breathless, her knees still on the floor. "You saved his life," he said, then turned and wheeled the man out of the shop. The silence that followed was deafening. The customers slowly returned to themselves, whispering. The clerk just stood there, stunned, not knowing what to say. Mary stood slowly, her body aching. Her scrubs were soaked in sweat, her palms sore from the effort. But her heart was steady. She walked out of the pawn shop quietly, gripping her father's watch tightly in one hand, unaware that someone had been recording the entire scene with their phone. She didn't care about recognition. She didn't even ask the man's name. But something inside her had shifted. What Mary didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that the man in camouflage was not just any stranger. He was Commander Logan West, a decorated Navy SEAL on leave, known only in classified circles. And while she walked into the night thinking the story had ended, it had only just begun. In that pawn shop, under flickering fluorescent lights and the scent of rust, and would. Mary had unknowingly saved the life of a national hero. And as the rain fell quietly on the city streets, the winds of fate began to move in ways she would never expect. Because within 24 hours, everything in Mary's life would change. Forever. The morning sun broke over Washington, D.C., casting pale light through the blinds of Mary Carter's apartment. She stirred from a restless sleep, unaware that her name had already become a symbol of quiet heroism online. Her clothes from the night before were still in a crumpled pile by the door, her shoes damp from the rain, and her father's watch sat silently on the table beside her. It ticked steadily, the only sound in the stillness of the room. Mary stretched and rose slowly, her body aching from the effort she had poured into a stranger's chest just hours before. She hadn't even asked his name. She only knew the feel of his lifeless body beneath her hands, and the miracle of breath returning to him before the paramedics swept him away. She didn't think much of it. Nurses saved lives every day. It was their calling. And though the pawn shop had been far from sterile, far from protocol, her instincts had done what needed to be done. A life was saved. That was what mattered. She gathered her things and got dressed for her shift at the hospital. She pinned her badge to her scrub top with quiet routine and headed out, unaware of what had unfolded while she slept. Across social media platforms, the video had spread like wildfire. A shaky but powerful clip captured the moment Mary dropped to her knees and began CPR on a stranger who had collapsed in the pawn shop. Her face was focused, determined, unwavering. In the comments, people called her a guardian angel. News outlets had already begun to pick up the story. Nurse saves man's life off-duty in D.C. pawn shop, the headlines read. Viewers applauded her bravery. Some even asked for her identity, wanting to thank her personally. But inside the white-walled halls of St. Augustine Medical Center, the mood was different. Mary arrived at the hospital, coffee in hand, her steps light with a quiet sense of peace. She had slept very little, but her heart felt full. She nodded politely to a few coworkers in the corridor, who glanced at her with unusual stiffness. She brushed it off, assuming they were just busy. Then her name echoed over the intercom. Mary Carter, please report to Human Resources immediately. Her pace slowed. A strange tightness gripped her chest. HR didn't call you in for casual things, especially not first thing in the morning. She made her way to the top floor, each step heavier than the last. When she arrived, the receptionist looked at her with a kind of awkward sympathy before motioning her toward a closed office door. Inside sat two administrators she barely knew by name. The director of nursing was there too, his expression unreadable. Mary sat down, unsure what to expect. Her fingers curled around her badge. The room was silent for a beat too long before the director spoke. We've reviewed the video circulating online, he said, tapping on a printout of a still frame from the footage. Mary, on her knees, giving CPR, her hospital badge clearly visible, her name and department identifiable. We understand your intentions were good, the HR representative added, but this constitutes a serious breach of protocol. Mary blinked, confused. I wasn't on duty. I was just leaving the hospital. A man collapsed. I did what I'm trained to do. That's the problem, the director said, leaning forward. You were in uniform, with your badge exposed. It gives the impression you were acting in an official capacity. You engaged in a medical procedure without clearance or liability coverage. If something had gone wrong, the hospital could be held accountable. Mary stared at them, stunned. So you're punishing me for saving someone's life. We're not punishing you, the HR rep said carefully. We're following policy. You acted outside of our guidelines. It's a question of risk, of liability. I wasn't thinking about policies, Mary said, her voice tightening. I was thinking about his pulse, his breathing, his life. We understand that, the director said, but the words rang hollow. Nonetheless, effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Your final check will be sent by mail. Please return your badge and hospital property. Mary sat in stunned silence. It didn't feel real. The room, the walls, the dull lighting, they all faded as her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Slowly, she reached up and unclipped her badge. Her hand trembled as she placed it on the table. It clicked faintly against the surface, like a door closing. She stood without a word. Her legs felt weak, her chest tight, but she held her head high. As she walked out of the office, then down the corridor she had walked every day for the past 2 years, no one met her gaze. Not the nurses she had shared coffee breaks with. not the staff she had laughed with on night shifts. Doors seemed to close in her wake. Outside, the city looked exactly the same, as if nothing had changed. But for Mary, everything had. She had no job, no income, no plan. All she had done was follow her heart, trust her training, honor her oath, and save a stranger's life. And it had cost her everything. She returned home in silence. Her apartment was still. She placed the watch on the table again, its ticking loud now, like a heartbeat in an empty room. For a long time, she sat there, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't cry. Not yet. There was a quiet grief in her chest, not just for the job she lost, but for the way the world sometimes punishes the ones who do the right thing when no one else will. What she didn't know, not yet, was that outside her small apartment, the world was watching. That the very act that cost her everything would soon bring her a recognition far greater than she could ever imagine. But for now, all she felt was loss. And the silence that comes after doing something brave. The rain came slowly at first, just a soft whisper against the windows of Mary's apartment. She sat on the edge of her couch, still wearing her scrubs, even though her shift had ended hours ago, and her job with it. Her hospital badge was gone. Her ID, her access, her purpose. All of it had been taken in a sterile office with cold stares and colder words. Now, all she had was silence. The headlines had reached her phone by late afternoon. Local stations, blogs, even national health forums, nurse fired after saving life. Hospital Let's Go hero nurse. DC nurse terminated over viral CPR video. They said her name. They showed her face. Strangers were leaving comments. Some were furious at the hospital. Others called her courageous. But none of that filled the emptiness inside her chest. Mary wrapped her arms around herself and stared blankly at the floor. The lights inside were dim, and the world outside her windows had turned gray and wet. Drops of rain slid down the glass like slow-moving tears. Every now and then, thunder would grumble low over the city like something too tired to roar. She hadn't spoken to anyone since leaving the hospital. Her phone buzzed a few times, but she couldn't bring herself to look. She hadn't even eaten. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the pawn shop incident had long worn off, replaced by a heavy, aching stillness. In her hands, she held the old wristwatch she'd retrieved that morning. Her father's watch. A simple timepiece with a scratched face and faded leather band, but to her, it had always meant something. Time, memory, legacy. She turned it slowly between her fingers. That's when she heard it, a car engine, low and smooth, pulling up just outside. She looked up. Through the rain-blurred window, she saw a sleek black SUV glide to a stop by the curb. Its tinted windows offered no clue to who might be inside. Mary's stomach tightened. It wasn't the kind of vehicle that came to her neighborhood often, and certainly not to her. A moment later, came the knock. 3 firm raps against the door. Not urgent, not aggressive, but unmistakably deliberate. Mary stood slowly, unsure if she should open it. Her heart had just started to settle after the chaos of the day, and now her body was tense again, alert, uncertain. She hesitated at the door, hand hovering over the knob. Then came a second knock, slightly softer. "Miss Carter," a voice called from the other side. "We mean no harm. May we speak with you for a moment?" The voice was calm, official, and strangely reassuring. Mary opened the door. Standing there, soaked slightly from the rain, were 2 uniformed Navy officers. Posture straight, eyes focused, and between them stood a man who looked like he belonged in a history book. Tall, with broad shoulders and neatly combed silver hair, he wore a long dark coat over a sharp suit, his expression serious but not unkind. "Mary Carter?" the older man asked. She nodded, too stunned to speak. "I'm Admiral Richard Ross. These are my aides. May we come in?" She blinked. "Admiral? Navy?" Still silent, she stepped aside. The 3 men entered her modest apartment, bringing with them the scent of rain and something else, formality, gravity, a presence that shifted the energy in the room. They didn't sit. They didn't waste time. "I apologize for the unannounced visit," Admiral Ross began, his voice deep and measured. "But I believe you deserve to know who it was you saved." Mary said nothing, only looked at him, waiting. "The man you performed CPR on. His name is Commander Logan West," Ross said. "He's one of our most decorated Navy SEALs. Recently returned from an undisclosed operation. He suffered a sudden cardiac episode in civilian clothing, on an unscheduled visit to a federal contact downtown. No one around him knew who he was. No one, except you stepped in. Mary's eyes widened slightly, but she still didn't speak. You didn't know who he was, Ross continued, but you acted without hesitation. You gave him the care and time he needed to survive. And for that, Miss Carter, you didn't just save a man. You saved a national asset. A hero. Her throat tightened. I was just doing what any nurse would have done. Perhaps, Ross said, offering a rare, quiet smile. But most would have hesitated. Most would have listened to the clerk telling them to stop. You didn't. And you saved him. There was a pause. Then he looked at her more closely, with a seriousness that made her skin prickle. I also know what happened at your hospital today, he said. I saw the headlines. I've read the statements. Mary looked away. They said I broke protocol, that I put the hospital at risk. You followed your oath, the Admiral said. And in the process, you reminded the rest of us what that oath truly means. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a dark navy envelope, heavy and official-looking. You've been personally requested to appear in Washington tomorrow morning, he said. Her brows furrowed. I'm already in Washington. Not this Washington, he replied. The one behind closed gates. The one with marble halls. Mary stared at the envelope, heart pounding. Is this a hearing? She asked nervously. Am I being investigated? Admiral Ross shook his head gently. No, Miss Carter. This isn't punishment. This is something else. Something earned. He didn't explain further. He simply nodded once more, then turned to leave. The two officers followed without a word. But as he reached the door, Ross paused. Be ready at 0800. Transportation will arrive. And with that, they were gone, vanishing into the rain just as quickly as they had come. Mary closed the door, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the envelope in her hand. She still didn't know what it meant. She still didn't know why it was all happening. But in the silence that followed, something had changed. The hopeless fog of the day lifted just enough for light to break through. She was no longer alone. Someone had noticed. Someone had cared. And something told her, this wasn't just a thank you. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The morning sun cast a golden glow across the tarmac as Mary Carter stepped off the small military jet. The air smelled cleaner here, quieter, as if it carried the weight of history. Two sharply dressed men in black suits stood at the bottom of the stairs, waiting for her. One gave a respectful nod and gestured toward a sleek black sedan nearby. Miss Carter, we'll take you straight in, he said. Mary clutched her small purse tightly and followed. She wore a modest navy blue dress and a light coat, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She had barely slept the night before. The letter from Admiral Ross still felt surreal. One moment, she was grieving the loss of her job. The next, she was being summoned to the most powerful house in the country. The ride was quiet, but her thoughts weren't. Why me? Why all this? She'd done what any nurse would do, hadn't she? As they entered the heart of Washington, the buildings grew taller, the streets more ordered, until finally the gates appeared. The White House. Gleaming white pillars. Iron fences. Men in earpieces. The very place she had only ever seen on TV screens and textbooks. The car rolled to a smooth stop. Mary's heart beat like a drum. She stepped out, her low heels clicking against the polished walkway, and was ushered past security and through a wide corridor with high ceilings and marble floors. A gentle hush seemed to live within the walls, as if every step echoed across centuries. No one explained much. No long speeches. No waiting room. Just quiet, efficient movement. And then the door opened, and there he was, the President of the United States. He stood not behind a podium or desk, but near a window, hands folded behind his back, the morning light catching the silver in his hair. When he turned to face her, his expression was warm, sincere. He walked up to her and extended a hand. Mary Carter, he said. I've been waiting to meet you. She swallowed hard and shook his hand. Sir. I didn't expect. I know you didn't, he said gently. But sometimes, history isn't made in front of cameras or in war zones. Sometimes, it's made in pawn shops by people who refuse to walk away. She felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. You acted without hesitation, he continued, still holding her gaze. Not for glory. Not for recognition. You saved one of this nation's finest sons. But even more than that, you reminded us what quiet heroism looks like. Courage with no audience. Service with no reward. That's the America I believe in. Mary blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. She hadn't prepared for this. How could anyone prepare for this? Come, he said. We have something special for you. He led her down a corridor to a beautifully adorned room where a small group of officials and service members were gathered. She recognized Admiral Ross among them, his proud smile barely hidden behind his serious posture. The room was elegant, rich with history, the walls lined with portraits and flags. At the center stood a podium and a display table draped in blue. The president took his place behind the podium and began to speak. Not to reporters, not to the nation, but directly to the people in the room, and especially to her. He spoke of service, of sacrifice, of the silent strength found in people like Mary. He told the story of a nurse who stopped at a pawn shop for her late father's watch and ended up saving a decorated Navy SEAL's life. He described how that act, recorded by a stranger, had moved the nation, not just because it was dramatic, but because it was real, pure. Then he called her forward. Mary's legs felt like glass as she stepped up to the front of the room. The president reached behind the cloth and lifted something into the light. The Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, reserved for individuals whose contributions had changed lives, touched the nation, or inspired the world. As he placed it gently around her neck, the room erupted in applause. But Mary barely heard it. Her eyes shimmered with tears she could no longer hold back. Her chest felt full to bursting of pride, of disbelief, of something far greater than words. And then came the part that nearly brought her to her knees. The president turned to her again and said, "Miss Carter, we believe you still have work to do, important work. Which is why, effective today, a federal medical position has been created in your name. You'll be working directly with military hospitals and emergency training units across the country." Mary gasped softly. "That's not all," he continued. "You've also been given full transportation access, a new government vehicle, yours to use as needed." She felt faint. And lastly, he gestured toward an aide who stepped forward, holding a document. The deed to a home in Georgetown. Modest, beautiful, and already prepared for you. No more rent. No more worry. Just stability for someone who gave so much when no one was watching. Mary looked at the paper, her hand trembling as she took it. It was real. All of it. This wasn't just a thank you. It wasn't a symbolic gesture or political theater. It was a new life. A future born not out of ambition, but from the simple, selfless choice to kneel beside a stranger and keep going when others told her to stop. She stepped back, the weight of the medal resting against her chest, and looked around the room. Admiral Ross nodded at her, proud and calm. The president offered a final smile. The room slowly began to move again, as aides and staff clapped and returned to their duties. But Mary stood still, her heart swollen with something she had never felt before, honored, seen, valued. She had come to the White House nervous and uncertain. She was leaving it transformed. The sun had begun to lower behind the city skyline when Mary Carter was driven through the quiet streets toward Walter Reed Military Medical Center. The sky was washed in a soft amber glow, a peaceful contrast to the storm of emotions still stirring inside her. The events of the day, her visit to the White House, the medal now resting in its velvet case on the seat beside her, the applause, the honor, none of it had truly settled in yet. But now, she was going to see the man behind it all. The man she saved. The man she had only known as a stranger, lying lifeless on the floor of a pawn shop. Commander Logan West. Her driver stopped outside a private entrance, where two Navy officers escorted her into the facility. The hallways were quiet, lined with muted lighting and the clean scent of antiseptics. Nurses moved briskly through the corridors. It was a familiar environment to Mary, one she hadn't stepped into since being fired. And yet, it felt different now. She wasn't clocking in. She wasn't following a chart or assigned a room. She was here because of something else. Something deeper. They stopped outside a hospital room with a small nameplate that read, "Commander Logan West." The officer gently knocked once, then opened the door. Mary stepped in. The room was softly lit. The curtains were half drawn, allowing the evening light to filter through. Machines hummed gently, monitors, and pump, and the soft hiss of oxygen from a nasal cannula. And in the bed, propped up by pillows, sat a man with sharp features and tired, intelligent eyes. He looked up at, and when he saw her, his expression changed instantly. A slow smile formed across his face. "You're her," he said, voice gravelly but warm. You're the nurse. Mary stepped closer, her hands clasped in front of her. Yes, I'm Mary. He nodded slowly, as if he already knew that name by heart. I was hoping I'd get to see you. You're looking better than the last time I saw you, she said gently. He gave a low chuckle. Last time I saw you, I was technically dead. Mary smiled softly, her eyes beginning to mist. Logan motioned to the chair beside his bed. Please sit. She lowered herself onto the chair, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. There were no flashing lights here, no medals, no media. Just the two of them. Two people forever bound by something neither had planned for. I don't remember much, Logan admitted. But I remember your voice. You were counting. Calm but firm. Every number. I don't know. It felt like it was pulling me back. Like someone wasn't letting go. Mary lowered her gaze, her voice tender. You had no pulse. I didn't think I'd get you back. But you did, he said, his tone steady. You fought for me when I couldn't. And you didn't even know who I was. That didn't matter, she replied. You were a person who needed help. That's all I saw. A long pause hung between them, thick with emotion, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where understanding lived. Then Logan looked toward the window, his eyes distant. I've been in war zones. Seen things I'll never forget. I've had teammates shot beside me, had days where I didn't know if I'd see the sun again. But I never imagined that I'd come this close to dying in a place like that. A pawn shop? Off duty. No one around who knew me. He turned back to her. If you hadn't been there, Mary reached forward, touching his hand lightly. But I was. And I'm glad I was. They talked for hours. Time moved differently in that room. The world outside faded away. Logan told her about his missions, what he could say, anyway. About the burden of command. About the brothers he'd lost. About the wear and tear that didn't always show on the outside. He wasn't boastful. There was a quiet grief in his voice, the kind that only comes from living through more than most people ever will. Mary shared her side too. About the years in nursing school, the long nights in emergency rooms, the quiet ache of watching patients slip away despite everything. And about that day, the day she lost her job for doing what she thought was right. He listened to her with the same kind of intensity she had shown him when she fought to bring him back. And when she finished, he simply said, "They didn't deserve you." Those words sank deep. She had spent so much time doubting herself since that morning. Wondering if she'd done something wrong. If she'd overstepped. If she'd caused more damage than good. But hearing it from him, from the man whose life she'd held in her hands, meant more than any public award ever could. There was something unspoken between them now. A bond that couldn't be explained with logic or duty. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something purer than that. A shared understanding of life and fragility. Of choices made in moments that mattered. Eventually, a nurse peeked in, reminding Mary gently that visiting hours were over. She stood slowly, reluctant to leave. Logan reached for something on the tray beside him and handed it to her, a small Navy Challenge coin, engraved with a SEAL insignia. I don't give these to just anyone, he said. But I owe you more than I could ever repay. Mary turned the coin in her palm, her eyes filling again. You don't owe me anything. You gave me something back, too. She left the room that evening feeling lighter. Not because of the medal. Not because of the job or the house. But because she had sat with the man she had saved and found something neither of them had expected. Peace. In that hospital room, among the soft beeps of monitors and the quiet hum of healing, two souls had found each other. And Mary knew. The pain of losing her job had been real. But what she gained in its place was something far more lasting. Purpose. Honor. And a connection that fate had written into her story long before she ever stepped into that pawn shop. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Mary Carter had ever known. Her name had traveled far beyond Washington now. Her story had appeared in newspapers from coast to coast. Nurse fired for saving SEAL finds new purpose in national service. News anchors debated policy. Columnists wrote about integrity. Mothers told their children about her. Veterans saluted her in passing. But Mary didn't dwell on the headlines. She was too busy living in the quiet aftermath of something extraordinary. The house she now called home stood in a tree-lined street in Georgetown, brick-fronted and dignified, with white shutters and a modest front porch where she often sat in the early mornings, coffee in hand, listening to the birds before the world stirred. A flag fluttered gently outside her door, and neighbors never passed without a wave or a smile. Some stopped just to say thank you. Others brought homemade pies, hand-stitched gifts, or heartfelt notes. She accepted them all with grace, but never let it swell her pride. Her father's watch sat on the mantel above